All right, everybody, good morning to you. All right, so I am the youth minister. I'm Aaron. I'm not usually over here. Normally I'm in the gym with the kids, but this morning I get to preach. So I'm going to continue on with the sermon series, Living Life Well. We've been talking about some different spiritual disciplines that a Christian can get into as good practice in order to help us draw closer to God. And so the title of the series has been called Living Life Well. And we said that not because it's all just about feelings, because we're not supposed to live for our feelings. We're, as Christians, called to live by faith. And so through the series, through drawing closer to God with these different spiritual disciplines, there's just something peaceful and happy and joyful about coming into a relationship closer and closer with God. And that's where we get this theme, or the idea of living life well. And this morning, my discipline that I could share with y'all is silence and solitude. So you guys are going to be a great audience for this, at least compared to my normal audience, because I don't intend to have to tell any of you to shh a million times in the middle of the sermon. And I also, if you guys want to raise your hand and spontaneously tell me about what you did during Thanksgiving or what you want for Christmas, you can, but that's the normal audience that I'm with. So I kind of expect you guys to have a little bit more of a silent refrain to your worship, but you do you. It's all good. So I'm talking about silence and solitude. Solitude is where we purposefully what am I doing? Silence is where we purposely abstain from interaction with other human beings. We separate ourselves from others. Solitude is when you get away, when you find your own quiet time, your own quiet place to yourself. And this is something that's actually exemplified a lot in the Bible through tons of different biblical leaders. And Jesus was definitely no exception to finding his solitude, finding his alone time. And for Jesus, I feel like it's important to say that it was more than just a tool that he used to get away from people. Jesus used solitude as an opportunity for him to, yes, get away from people so that he could regroup, so that he could draw closer to his Father in heaven, and so that he could increase his ability to minister to those people when he went back. And so here's just a few examples. In Matthew 4, at the very beginning of Jesus' ministry, we have Jesus going out into the wilderness, into the desert, to pray and fast for 40 days. That's him getting away. That's him finding some solitude in the desert, wilderness. In Luke 6, he went out onto a mountaintop all by himself in order to pray, as he was kind of thinking about who he was going to invite to be his disciples, who were going to be his followers. He had to get away up onto a mountaintop all by himself. In Matthew 14, after he heard the news about John the Baptist being killed, the scripture says that he withdrew to a secluded place by himself. So we've got examples of him going off to be alone whenever he was starting out a ministry, whenever he was in the middle of choosing or a big decision that was on the way, in the middle of his grief, he decided that he was going to go and find some solitude. And in Matthew 26, right before he was arrested and was going to be killed in the Garden of Gethsemane, he was with his disciples there praying, and he went off by himself to pray on 3 separate occasions. Even though he was with those close friends, he wanted to find his solitude and his silence to pray in order to draw closer to God in all of those situations. And so I feel like there's just so many examples of Jesus doing it in Scripture that it's something that we should take a look at and see how we can implement this idea of silence and solitude in our lives. Because through it, I really feel like we can experience the presence of God in a way that you can't do if you've got the hustle and bustle of the world going on around you, if you're in the middle of the chaotic, crazy days that we're all bound to have. And so let's think about a regular day that some of us might have. So whenever you're at home, you're probably either surrounded by a spouse or children. So there's not much solitude found there. Occasionally you might have some time alone at the house by yourself. And in which case, if your house is anything like mine, then there's always a TV on in the background, or there's always some music playing, or I'm always on the computer doing something. And so it's never a silent environment. Or whenever you go to work or school, if you're in school, at those environments, you're going to be surrounded by people. You're going to be in the middle of a sometimes chaotic environment. And maybe you can find some solitude while you're driving during your commute to or from work. Well, you can find silence and solitude there, but again, if you're like me, then oftentimes whenever I'm driving, especially if you're like hitting traffic or something, then it's not a very solitude experience. You're like, there are people all around me right now, and we're not going anywhere. Or you've got the situation where there's somebody, like there's a punk driver over there, and you're really annoyed at the way that they're driving because it's affecting you. And so again, the solitude is broken because you're focusing on them and how they should just get off the road. And so driving, commute, whenever you wake up, maybe you go straight into breakfast and you're having breakfast with the family, or maybe you've got some quiet alone time there. I just feel like our days can get so filled with the hustle and bustle, with people, friends, family, responsibilities, obligations, work, that unless we are intentional about setting aside some time specifically for this idea of silence and solitude, it's just not going to happen on its own. It's not going to happen unless you make it happen. And so, I don't know about you, I'm sure that you agree that a time of rest, a break from the craziness of life, is always very welcome. You love those days where you can have a break, where you can chill out at home, where you can just relax. And I feel like all of us are the same way. Life can get busy, and whenever you finally get a break, it's very welcome. It's very, you want that. You need that time of rest, and that's even biblical as well. But the purpose of this sermon and this spiritual discipline, as it's something that we need to do, is whenever we get those moments, those days of rest, maybe it's even a moment of rest, whenever we get those opportunities, do we just sit down and watch TV? Do we take a nap? I love naps, so if that's what you do, go for it. But whenever we actually get those times of rest, what are we going to do with that opportunity? Are we going to take advantage of and maybe try? The purpose of this sermon is a challenge for me and a challenge for you. Of when those few fleeting moments of rest do come along, perhaps we can challenge ourselves not to just turn on the TV or take a nap, but to practice this idea of silence and solitude in our own spiritual lives by blocking out the chaos and the noise and focusing on yourself and your relationship with God. Now, it's moments of this solitude that are time, you can do it different ways. In this moment of solitude, if you can set aside some time during your day, it can be filled with thanksgiving and prayer and worship to God. And that's great. If you can find some time to do that during the day, it will, I feel like it'll help you. It gives your spirit opportunity to grow. It gives your spirit fuel for the day. However, that prayer and the worship and the thanksgiving offerings in your quiet time to God, that's really good too. But the sermon topic that I was given was the combination of silence, or of solitude and silence. So it's not something that I don't practice that often until this week. I tried to have myself a lot of solitude and silence time. Although that was very hard, especially during Thanksgiving break. Like, you got parents, you got family coming in and going. So this week was a very busy week for me. I don't know about you. But yesterday, alone in my office, I was finally able to shut the door. Nobody was here. Turned everything off, and I got in the studying mindset, preparing for the sermon, and it was a different experience for me. Because again, things are always happening. There's always something going on. Or in my quiet time, I'm actively praying to God. I'm thanking Him. I'm asking for guidance. I'm asking for things. But the idea of just sitting there and letting it be a time where you focus on God and let the relationship that you have with Him be something that you just ponder and try and be silent with it. It's a different experience for sure. And it can also be a very, very awkward experience. Like me sitting in my office, it's not that awkward because it's just me. If somebody were to come in and be like, Aaron, what are you doing? Like, I'm not sleeping, I'm meditating. But silence in itself is a very awkward thing. It's an awkward process. I'm the kind of guy that whenever I meet somebody, I feel like I have to be a socialite and I have to carry on a conversation. I have to say cool things about myself and compliment them and try and fill the space with just noise, essentially. That's like part of my personality. And so silence, whenever you, especially in the context of meeting somebody new or like making a friendship, it can just be really weird. And one of the best examples that I have of this idea of awkward silence probably would come and play with the community group that I'm a part of. It was about 2 years or so that my community group kind of formed. There was me and Tasha and like 8 other people from the church that started gathering together on Tuesday nights, and we started here in the church. And our community groups at SEC are just an opportunity for people to get together, to kind of do life together, and just have an opportunity for a Bible study and talk and just kind of grow as the community of the church, but also as just a small, close-knit kind of family type thing. However, that can be very, very awkward whenever it's a bunch of people that don't really know each other. And that was exactly the case for my small group whenever it formed. Tasha and I that was like 6 months after I moved here and I became a member and started working here. And so I'd known the people that were in the group, but I didn't know, and it's not like we were friends. And so the first couple of nights we'd come in and sit down and, we'd do the polite social, like, hello, how are you? How was your week going? Let's look at this Bible text, and then I'll ask a question about it, and we'll sit awkwardly in silence as we try and figure out who's going to say something, or if anything is going to be said, or if I need to move on to the next question in order to try and make this a fun, enjoyable social gathering. And so I remember lots of situations where it was just awkward, especially with the silence. And I found this sheet of paper which has ground rules for small group discussions. Jonathan gave this to me whenever we first started the small group, and I would read this. I read it at like the first 3 or 4 weeks that we gathered, because it just gave a kind of a list and kind of set the ground rules or the basis for our community group there. And one of the things on the list, I remember laughing about it then, and then I thought about it this week, so I'm glad I found this piece of paper. The 4th thing on the list is silence. It is important to allow silence in the group, as it provides an opportunity for somebody to share and for members of the group to process the topic or question being considered. And I remember reading that to the group and just thinking that was fun. Like, we don't have any shortage of silences here, so we're following the ground rules. Good job, guys. But it was such an important part of that social gathering for us. In order for us to get together, you don't want to talk over somebody. You want to make sure that you give people the time to process the questions, and you want to make sure that everybody has the ability to be heard in a community group setting. And I feel like over the last 2 years, we've gotten better at this. Silence in the group is now essentially non-existent because we have 3 babies, and we've all kind of grown close to the point where we just talk and yell at each other and just go back and forth constantly. So it's a quite different dynamic from when we first started. But this topic still kind of reigns true in that community group setting that we had, and in this idea of our spiritual lives. If we can find the time to find some silence, to have our own personal quiet and solitude time, then it would give us the opportunity to process and provides God the opportunity to speak with his small, quiet voice into our life as well. Because again, with the world being chaotic and our schedules being so busy and us going here and there and doing this and that and having social obligations and whatnot, it's very unlikely that there's just this natural quiet time in your days where you can sit back and listen to God unless you set that time aside specifically for it. And so on top of silence being kind of awkward, inherently awkward, when you think about this idea of a deep personal reflection that you yourself are having with God, the creator of the universe, it can also be a scary idea. The idea of you taking the time to clear your mind of all else and sit and focus on your relationship with God can be kind of frightening, because it's kind of like, what things are going to come to your mind in that situation? Are you going to be thinking about, the areas in which you mess up, the areas in which you've sinned, the areas in which you maybe have this inkling that you should change or you should make some type of different action with your behavior, but but if you stop and actually think about that, then maybe you'll be convicted of it. So it's a scary thing. And the book that Jonathan and I have been going through, so this Living Life Well series with the different disciplines, we've been basing it off of a book called The Spirit of the Disciplines by Dallas Willard. And in it, he said, "In solitude, we confront our own soul with its obscure forces and conflicts that escape our attention when we are interacting with others." So he's kind of saying there that whenever other things are happening, it's easy to, overlook any personal things that you might have that you should change, or any nagging inklings on the inside. It's easy whenever the room's crowded and there's noise all around. And that it bursts apart the shell of our superficial securities. So what I think that he's saying is that there's often a reason why we would avoid the silence, is we don't want to be confronted with those inner demons. We don't want to have to think or dwell on, our failings, or where our relationship with God, where we fall short, because then you're actually giving, you're giving an audience to the idea of, maybe I could improve myself. Maybe there are these things, these steps that I could do to change my current behavior and be more like Christ. And so there's this fear. And so I just quoted Dallas Willard from the fancy theological book. I've got another quote for you that I couldn't help but get out of my head this week as I was preparing the sermon. And it's something that's a little bit less theological, a little bit more musical, because it resonates really well with me, and it's from one of my favorite bands, and I've got at least 2 kids in the youth group that would be really on board with me giving this quote in the middle of church. At least one of them's here right now. It's a quote from my favorite band, 21 Pilots, and a song called Car Radio. And so let me just muse you with my own musical stylings and this quote. And so you can give it some thought, because I've contemplated the song, and it's awesome. So here we go. "I have these thoughts so often I ought to replace that slot with what I once bought, because somebody stole my car radio, and now I just sit in silence. I ponder of something terrifying, because this time there's no sound to hide behind. I find over the course of our human existence one thing consists of consistence, and that's that we're all battling fear. Oh dear, I don't know if we know why we're here. Oh, am I too deep? Please stop thinking. I liked it better when my car had sound." All right, that's it. That's the only quote that you get. There's a lot more to the song, and bet you by golly I could sing the whole thing for you from memory if I wanted to. But it's a quote that has to deal with the fact that whenever things stop, whenever it gets quiet, often our minds, they'll go to some dark places. They'll go to the areas where we messed up, or the problems that we don't want to think about. And so silence in that regard can be kind of scary, because what noise does is it comforts us. Total silence is very, very rare. Like, even if everyone in this room were to be completely silent, if I were to stop, you'd still hear the burgling from the baptistry back here, or the buzz of these lights, or maybe whirls from computers, or the fans on these projectors. Even if we go silent, there's still things that are going on, and it's gotten to a point where it's a comfortable silence, or it's a comfortable noise that's always going on around us. In fact, the lack of noise can also make us feel uncomfortable, because it gives us the impression that nothing's happening, that the world stopped, and we live in a society that's always go, 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 go. So if it's quiet and you get the impression that, oh, nothing's happening, then it's one of those things that's awkward and scary. But one of the good things about that idea of silence and it making it seem like the world has stopped is that can open up a real opportunity for you to just be you in God. Like, if the sound is turned off, if the chaos is pushed away, if you find yourself in a solitude situation, then it can just be you and God as you contemplate your relationship, as you think about who He is and His love for you, and just what it is that you truly believe. Like, this could be the great purpose of finding this time of silence and solitude. All right, so I want to look at a biblical passage that deals with Jesus and His disciples finding some time to get away. And I'm going to be opening my Bible up to Mark chapter 6. And in Mark chapter 6, this is where we get Mark's version of the story of the feeding of the 5,000. And so some of you might have heard that story before. It's where a bunch of people are gathered, and Jesus is miraculously able to feed the entire multitude with just a tiny, tiny amount. And so it's one of those stories that's mentioned in all of the Gospels. So we've got like a lot of different versions of it. But in Mark, it's cool because it gives you this, I don't know, this really busy, chaotic scene and a break, and then the chaos starts up again, which I thought resonated with what my days can often look like. So I'm going to start in Mark chapter 6 in verse 30. The apostles gathered around Jesus and reported to him all they had done and taught. Then, because so many people were coming and going that they did not even have a chance to eat, he said to them, "Come with me by yourselves to a quiet place and get some rest." So I'm going to pause there because Mark's setting up the story here and saying that the day was so crazy and so chaotic that all of the disciples were doing acts of service. They were dealing with people, helping meet people's needs. They were coming and going, and they were just busy, so busy, in fact, that they didn't even have an opportunity to eat. And so that is, if you prioritize food as much as I do, then that is pretty busy. And so they were going, and whenever Jesus was able to reunite with them in the midst of this crazy day, and still in the midst of the crowd of people around them, Jesus recognized that, oh, these men, my disciples, they need a reprieve. They need a break. And so he arranged for them all to leave the crowds and go and find some solitude and some silence. And it's cool because they, like, in that society and in the crowds that they had there, I would kind of think, like, how do you get away from that? Because it seemed like everywhere that the disciples went and everywhere that Jesus went, the people would just follow because they wanted to know more about Jesus. They wanted to hear about him and the things that he was teaching. And so how do you get away from that situation? If you were to go in one house over here and lock the doors, I feel like people would just crowd around, and maybe they'd even start tearing holes in the roof and lower people down in, because that's happened before. Or maybe if they were to, just try and go out into the woods, into a field, I feel like people will just march and follow them. But in this particular story here, Jesus arranges for them to get in a boat and just go out to sea, which is I think a great way for them to get away. I don't often go out on boats, but it's a very peaceful, relaxing scenario in my mind. Like, we've even got the living life well with the water and the shore, like just going out into the tranquility of the water where all of the people have to stay on land. They're not going to swim to follow you. Maybe if they had their own boat, they could follow you, but still then you're separated by a boat, unless they jump off their boat and come onto yours. And so Jesus found this opportunity amidst a crazy and chaotic situation in order for him and the disciples to find some silence, find some solitude, in order to recover, in order to renew themselves. Because again, these guys were doing ministry day in and day out, and they were preaching to people, and they were healing and teaching. And with all of that to be done, they needed something to fill them back up. They needed a reprieve. And as they go out on this boat, they finally get that a little bit, because if you read with me as it continues, the reprieve was not very long lasting. So in verse 32, they went away by themselves in a boat to a solitary place. But many who saw them leaving recognized them and ran on foot from all the towns and got there ahead of them. Then Jesus landed and saw a large crowd, and he had compassion on them, because they were like sheep without a shepherd. So he began teaching them many things. And it's just interesting, because with that conclusion, once they actually got to their destination, it all started right back up again. As soon as they hit the other side, that's where the crowds are going to get even bigger. 5,000 people are going to show up to be taught and to listen to what Jesus has to say. And so they're going to have to jump right back in to the hustle and bustle of ministry as soon as the boat hits the shoreline. And so it's just a great, but very small opportunity that Jesus and those disciples had to rest and reflect on the boat ride that they had, the isolated boat ride. And I feel like that's something that, is common in our days. Maybe your days are so filled with things to do, with obligations, that you're questioning in your mind, like, how am I going to find this time to find some silence or some solitude? Well, it's just a great example that Jesus did with his disciples, because he found whatever opportunity that he could, just that boat ride amidst ministry to ministry, that little transition is when they were able to focus and reset themselves. And so some examples of this in your life might be, maybe it is your commute. Like I said, that sometimes I can get frustrated with cars all around me, and it's not a very peaceful time for me. But maybe that's the time that you can find. Maybe 5 minutes on a lunch break at work could be all the time that you could spare in your day, but that would be something. If your house is going from the time you wake up to the time you go to sleep, maybe you could wake up a little bit earlier before the crowd stirs, or maybe you could stay up later after everybody goes to sleep in order to find some time of solace, in order to find a time where it's quiet, in order to focus on your relationship with God. Again, this is something that it's a discipline, so it's something that we need to be, firm about making happen in our lives, and it's not just going to happen automatically. So, with this idea of silence and solitude, everything that I've kind of been saying so far has kind of put the two together, because they go very well together. The idea of separating yourself from other people, from the chaos, from the world, and being quiet to reflect and listen to the voice of God. Those two go very well together. But I want to talk just briefly, as one of my later points in the sermon, about just silence alone, because some of us could maybe just practice the art of silence more regularly in life. And I'm one of these individuals, because like I said earlier, whenever it comes to me meeting new persons, I often feel like that social obligation to keep talking, to keep saying things. Whereas if I would, be able to just shut my mouth a little bit more, maybe I could get to know that person better. Because part of silence, like one of the big parts of the spiritual discipline of silence, is working on your ability to listen. Whether it be listening to God, listening to that voice, and seeing if you can hear or feel God's stirrings in your spirit or through Scripture, or in the application of, like, with people, whenever we're silent in a conversation, it gives us a better opportunity to listen and learn more about the people that you're having a conversation with. Because I feel like, and this is a personality thing as well, some people can talk and talk and talk and talk, and some people are very quiet. My wife will tell you that whenever it comes to the conversations that we have, I'm more of this silent, stoic man. So I'll live up to that reputation. But whenever I'm like around people, I feel like I have to be talking. And so the idea of silence is something that can help if we're practicing on it, it's something that can help any of us work on our ability to listen. Now, the practice of not speaking can help give us control over what we say as well. Because sometimes we have it like our tongues just say things before we think about them, or we might not contemplate fully what it is that we're saying, or the repercussions that the things that we say have, or the meaning that somebody else could take behind our words. And so this act of kind of being silent, and it creates this space, this mental space for us to kind of weigh the things that we say more. And I think that that's a very important and a great skill for just people to have socially, but especially for Christians, because in the Bible, we often see times where our witness is such a big part of what God calls us to do. God calls us to go and share our faith and our testimony with people and help share the love of Jesus. But such a big part of that is the words that we say. And in James chapter 3, he talks a lot about the importance of our words, and how if we are really quick to be angry, if we're quick to say things that are harsh to other individuals, then that is a big hindrance to the witness that we have with people sometimes. And so, as James and other places in the Bible talk about the importance of the things we say, when it comes to our ability to witness, if the more control we have over our words, and the more thought that we put behind our conversations with people about our relationship with God, and when it comes to like silence and solitude, if we have more time to contemplate how we view and interact with God and how much He loves us, then that maybe could give us more fuel, more words to say in a well thought out way whenever we're sharing that love of Jesus with other people. because just such a big part of having a relationship with another person is your ability to listen to them. And one of the taglines that we have at Snellville Christian Church is love God and love people. And it's really hard to do that if you don't listen to God, if you don't listen to people as well. So it's just such a big part of the way that we communicate. So with all of this conversation, with this idea of finding some silence and solitude, I'm kind of leaving you with a challenge this week. Last week, Jonathan challenged us to find a time to fast and pray. And I was able to do that this week. I waited until well after Thanksgiving. I did mine yesterday in preparation for today. And that's another one of those spiritual disciplines that I don't put into practice that often, and that it feels good, and it's necessary even for us to practice and to put into effect in our lives in order for us to grow or to see how it is that these spiritual disciplines can help work on us. And so this week I've kind of got a similar challenge for you. Is there a time that you can find this week to be intentional about finding some time of solitude and some time of silence? Now, if you're somebody that has a relationship with God, that believes in Him, that's maybe been coming to church for a while, then this week could you find an opportunity to get into a quiet state and do some of that meditating, do some of the just inward soul searching that we can try to just kind of block out the chaos and the noise and focus on your relationship with Jesus. And if maybe it's been one of those things that you feared it as being awkward or scary because there might be some things that you don't want to face whenever it comes to being silent and inwardly reflecting. That's always going to be there unless you confront it, unless you find the opportunity to go to God. And I can attest to this as part of my relationship with God. Like, He is a God that can remove your burdens. He is a God that can help you just alleviate the fears and the doubts. But like part of the main biblical understanding that I've come to understand is that we are all messed up. We are all broken and we all fail. But we've got this God who is beside us 100% and is ready to pull us out of whatever situation we might get us into, and He's ready to help us and guide us and be with us. So if you're a believer, if maybe you just haven't set aside that time to be silent and reflective, then I'm challenging you to that this week. If you're not a believer, if you're still maybe thinking about what it is that who this God is, or you just haven't quite come to that ideal that relationship or that understanding, then I challenge you this week as well. Find some quiet time. Find some time where you can get alone and think about who God is, or what you've seen in this world, what your relationships have taught you, what your understanding of church is. Really give it some thought, because it's one of those things that unless you set the time to, then you're not going to be intentional about, oh yes, what do I really feel about God? Because I'm challenging any individual to sit and contemplate, what is the evidence for God in your life? Have you seen it? Have you seen God's love present in another Christian in another amazing way? Or it's just this idea of finding the time to actually sit and contemplate, because it can be such a beneficial thing to anybody to release burdens, to help you just get on the right track. And again, this sermon series is called Living Life Well, because I feel like these disciplines, and especially this idea of silence and solitude, can help us to just gain a better understanding of our relationship with God, can help us to find some time to alleviate some of our worries or fears, and it'll just help us to do just that, to live